Success is not built in the spotlight. It is built in the silence where no one is watching and no one is clapping, and years later the world will only see the result, never the struggle. And that is exactly what happened to Emma Carter. Because on a cold winter night when the city lights dimmed and the noise faded away, she was not standing on a stage. She was sitting on the floor of a tiny 300-square-foot apartment with cracked walls and a flickering desk lamp that barely lit the pages in front of her, her hands slightly trembling from exhaustion, her eyes heavy after a long day. Yet she kept going, because stopping felt heavier than continuing. Every page she turned felt like a small battle. Every word she tried to understand felt like climbing a hill with no end in sight. And outside her window the world was quiet. But inside her mind there was a constant voice asking one question. Why are you even trying? You are just a poor girl. No one expects anything from you. No one is waiting for you to succeed. And maybe that voice was right. Because at school she was invisible. Teachers barely noticed her. Classmates laughed at her worn-out clothes and quiet nature. They talked about big dreams like they belonged to them, not to someone like her. And every day Emma walked past people who had more support, more confidence, more opportunities, and each time she felt smaller, like she was standing miles behind in a race she never signed up for. But something inside her refused to accept that ending. Something quiet but stubborn kept whispering, just one more page, just one more hour, just one more night. And so she built a habit no one saw, a routine no one praised, a discipline that didn't look impressive but felt relentless, night after night. While others slept comfortably in warm beds, she sat under that dim light, reading, writing, trying, failing, trying again. And it didn't look like success. It looked slow. It looked lonely. It looked almost pointless. Until one night, everything nearly broke, because after hours of studying, her vision blurred. The words stopped making sense, and she dropped her pencil, staring at the open book as tears filled her eyes. Not because she was weak, but because she was tired of feeling like it wasn't enough, tired of fighting a battle no one else could see. And in that moment she asked herself the question that changes everything. What if I just stop? What if this is all I will ever be? And the room went silent, the kind of silence where a single decision can shape your entire life. And Emma sat there, frozen between giving up and moving forward, not knowing that what she would do next would one day become the part of her story the world would never forget. Emma did not stand up right away. She did not suddenly feel strong or inspired. She just sat there staring at that open book, breathing slowly, as if the weight of the world had settled on her shoulders. And for the first time she allowed herself to feel everything, the exhaustion, the doubt, the quiet fear that maybe all of this effort would lead nowhere. And that thought stayed with her for a long moment, heavy and real. But then something small happened, something almost invisible. She reached for her pencil again, not with confidence, not with excitement, but with a simple decision. She would try one more time, not for success, not for recognition, just to not quit tonight. And that was how it continued, not with big motivation, but with small choices, over and over again. Emma stopped thinking about the future. She stopped asking if it would be worth it. She focused only on what was in front of her, one problem, one page, 1 hour. And slowly those nights began to stack, like quiet bricks building something she could not yet see. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and nothing on the outside seemed to change. She was still the same quiet girl in the same worn clothes, still sitting in the back of the classroom, still unnoticed. But inside, something was different. Her mind was sharper, her focus stronger, her patience deeper. And there was a calm confidence growing that did not need approval, because she had seen herself keep going when it was hardest. And that changed how she saw everything. One afternoon a teacher handed back a test, and for the first time Emma saw a score that surprised even her. It was not perfect, but it was higher than most. And as she looked around, she noticed something she had never paid attention to before. The same students who once seemed far ahead were not as far as she thought. They were just more visible. And that realization shifted something inside her. She was not behind. She was just quiet. And from that day on, her routine became even more focused. She began waking up earlier, studying before school, using every spare moment to learn, not because someone told her to, but because she had started to believe that her effort mattered. And yet the journey was still not easy. There were nights when her body felt too tired to sit up, mornings when she questioned everything again, moments when progress felt too slow to notice. But each time she returned to the same decision: just do not quit today. And that simple rule carried her further than she ever imagined. Because what Emma did not realize was that while the world still saw her as invisible, she was slowly becoming someone who could not be ignored. And the gap between who she was and who she was becoming was closing. One quiet night at a time did not suddenly reward Emma with a miracle. There was no single moment where everything became easy. Instead, the challenges grew quietly alongside her progress. Because as she improved, the expectations around her also began to change. Teachers who once overlooked her started calling on her in class. Not with praise, but with pressure. Classmates who ignored her before now noticed her answers. And not all of that attention felt kind. Some questioned how she had improved so much. Others whispered that it was just luck. And for a moment those voices crept back into her mind, making her wonder if she truly deserved the progress she had made. But this time something was different. Instead of stopping her, the doubt became something she could observe without believing. Because she had evidence, not from others, but from her own nights, her own effort, her own quiet discipline. And that gave her a strength that no opinion could take away. Still, the road ahead became harder. The material she studied was no longer simple. The problems took longer. The answers were not always clear, and there were nights when she spent hours on a single page without solving it. Nights when frustration built slowly, testing her patience in ways she had never experienced before. But she did not return to who she used to be. She did not run from the difficulty. She leaned into it, even when it felt uncomfortable, even when progress slowed down. Because she had learned something deeper than just studying. She had learned how to stay, how to sit with uncertainty without giving up. And that became her greatest advantage. Not intelligence, not talent, but endurance. Weeks later, an important exam was announced, one that would determine scholarships and future opportunities. And suddenly everything felt heavier. Because this was no longer just about improvement. This was about a real chance to change her life. And with that came fear. The fear of failing after coming so far. The fear that maybe all of her effort would still not be enough. And that fear followed her into every study session, every page she read, every problem she solved. But instead of avoiding it, she acknowledged it quietly and continued anyway, night after night, returning to the same small promise: just do not quit today. And as the exam approached, the pressure outside grew louder, but inside Emma there was a calm that surprised even her. Not because she was certain of success, but because she knew something more important. She had already changed, regardless of the result. She was no longer the girl who doubted every step. She was someone who could keep moving forward even when nothing felt guaranteed. And on the night before the exam, as she sat once again under that same dim light in her small apartment, she closed her book, not because she had finished everything, but because she understood something clearly. She had done what she could. And whatever happened next would not erase who she had become. But deep down, there was still one question, waiting to be answered. Had all those silent nights truly been enough to change her future? The morning of the exam arrived quietly, without any dramatic sign or special feeling. Just another day that looked ordinary to everyone else. But for Emma, it carried the weight of every night she had spent studying alone, every moment she chose not to quit. And as she walked into the classroom, she noticed how different everything felt, not outside, but inside her. The same desks, the same walls, the same students. Yet her thoughts were calmer, steadier, as if she had already faced something harder than this test. And in a way she had. Because the real challenge was never the exam itself, it was all those silent nights that came before it. And now she sat down, took a slow breath, and began. The questions were not easy. Some required deep thinking. Others tested details she had struggled with before, and for a moment the old doubt tried to return, whispering that maybe this was too much. Maybe she would fail despite everything. But this time she did not panic. She simply moved forward, one question at a time, just like she had done every night. Not rushing, not overthinking, just staying present. And as the minutes passed, something unexpected happened. She began to recognize patterns, ideas she had practiced. Concepts that once felt impossible now made sense. Not perfectly, but enough. Enough to continue. Enough to trust herself. And that trust became her rhythm, steady and quiet. carrying her through the entire exam, until finally she placed her pencil down, not with certainty, but with peace, because she knew she had given her best, and that was something no result could take away. Days later, the results were posted, and the hallway filled with noise, excitement, disappointment, voices reacting to numbers on a page, and Emma stood there for a moment before stepping closer, her heart beating just a little faster, not out of fear, but out of curiosity, and when she saw her name, she paused, not because she did not understand, but because it felt unreal. Her score was among the highest, higher than she had ever imagined, and for a brief second everything around her faded, replaced by a quiet realization. All those nights had meant something. Every small effort had added up, and the gap she once felt between herself and others had closed, not suddenly, but step by step, in silence. And as people began to notice, some with surprise, some with respect, Emma did not feel the need to explain anything, because they were only seeing the result, not the journey, and that was something only she truly understood. But what she did not know yet was that this moment was only the beginning, because the door that had just opened would lead her into a world far bigger than she had ever imagined. A world where her discipline would be tested again, where her quiet strength would face new challenges, and where the story of those silent nights was about to grow into something no one could ignore. The days after the results did not feel like a victory celebration. Instead, they felt like the beginning of something unfamiliar, because for the first time Emma was no longer invisible. Teachers spoke to her with expectation, classmates looked at her with curiosity, and opportunities that once seemed distant began to appear in quiet but real ways. One of those opportunities was a scholarship program, something she had never seriously considered before, not because she did not want it, but because it always felt out of reach, and now suddenly it was possible. But with that possibility came a new kind of pressure, one that was heavier than before, because now it was not just about proving something to herself. It was about stepping into a world where the standards were higher, the competition stronger, and the margin for doubt much smaller. And as Emma looked at the application requirements, the essays, the interviews, the expectations, she felt a familiar feeling return, the quiet fear that maybe she did not belong there, that maybe she had only been lucky this time. And that thought stayed with her longer than she expected, because success had not removed her doubt. It had only changed its shape. But instead of letting that doubt stop her, she returned to the same approach that had carried her this far. She did not try to solve everything at once. She focused on one step, one application, one answer at a time. And just like before, the process was not easy. Writing about her life forced her to face the reality of where she came from, the struggles she had tried to ignore, the nights she had almost given up, and putting those experiences into words was harder than any test she had taken. Because this time she was not just proving what she knew, she was revealing who she was. And there were moments when she questioned whether her story was enough, whether her quiet effort would stand out in a world full of louder achievements. But then she realized something important. Her story was not about being the best. It was about not quitting, and that truth became her strength. Day by day, she worked through each part of the process, refining her thoughts, preparing for interviews, practicing how to speak about her journey without losing its honesty. And once again her routine returned, early mornings, late nights, consistent effort, not driven by fear, but guided by purpose. And as the submission day arrived, Emma did not feel completely ready, but she understood that waiting for perfect confidence was something she could not afford. So she submitted her application anyway, trusting the same principle that had guided her before. Do the work and let the result come later. And as she stepped away from it, there was a quiet sense of growth inside her, because regardless of what would happen next, she had already done something she once believed was impossible. She had stepped forward when it mattered, and somewhere beyond her sight, the next chapter of her journey had already begun to unfold, one that would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. The waiting period that followed felt longer than anything Emma had experienced before, not because of the number of days, but because of the uncertainty that filled each one. There was nothing left for her to do, no more pages to study, no more answers to refine, only time. And time had a way of testing patience in a different way, because now her progress could not be measured by effort. It could only be felt through trust, and that was something much harder to hold on to. Every Morning she woke up and continued her routine, still studying, still improving, even without a clear result in sight, because she understood something that had taken her months to learn. Consistency was not only for when things were certain, it mattered even more when nothing was guaranteed. And yet the doubt returned in quieter forms, not as loud questions, but as small thoughts that appeared at unexpected moments. What if it is not enough? What if someone else is better? What if this is where it ends? And each time those thoughts appeared, she did not fight them aggressively. She simply noticed them and returned to her work, because she had learned that discipline was not about eliminating doubt. It was about moving forward despite it. Days turned into weeks, and the world around her moved on as usual. But inside Emma, there was a steady tension between hope and realism. She did not allow herself to dream too far ahead, but she also refused to expect failure. She stayed balanced, focused on what she could control, until one afternoon something finally changed. An email arrived, simple and quiet, without any dramatic announcement, just a message waiting to be opened. And for a moment Emma did not click it, not because she was afraid of bad news, but because she understood that this single moment carried the result of everything she had built. And once she opened it, there would be no going back. So she took a breath, steady and slow, and then she opened it. Her eyes moved across the words carefully, line by line. And as the meaning became clear, she did not react immediately. There was no sudden shout, no dramatic movement, just a quiet stillness, because what she saw was something she had once believed was impossible. She had been accepted, not just accepted, but awarded the scholarship. And for a moment the room felt different, not because anything had changed physically, but because the distance between her past and her future had suddenly become real. All those nights, all those decisions, all those moments of choosing not to quit had led to this. And yet what surprised her most was not the result itself, but how calm she felt, because deep down she already knew, long before this message arrived, that she had changed, that she had become someone capable of reaching this point. And the acceptance was not the beginning of her story, it was the confirmation of everything she had already built in silence. But even as this new door opened, Emma understood something clearly. This was not the end, it was another beginning, and the world she was about to enter would demand even more from her than anything she had faced before the first day Emma stepped onto the new campus. Everything felt bigger than she had imagined. The buildings were taller, the classrooms were filled with confident voices, and the students around her carried themselves with a certainty that made her feel small again. But this time it was different, because she recognized that feeling. She had felt it before, back in that small apartment, back when she thought she did not belong anywhere beyond her limits. And yet she had proven herself wrong once, so she did not run from it now. She walked forward quietly, taking in every detail, every new environment, every unfamiliar expectation, knowing that this was the next level of the same journey. But the challenge here was different. It was no longer about catching up. It was about keeping up, because everyone around her had their own stories of discipline, their own versions of effort. And for the first time, Emma was surrounded by people who were just as determined as she was. And that reality tested her in ways she did not expect. The lessons moved faster, the assignments required deeper thinking, and the margin for mistakes felt smaller. There were days when she sat in class and understood less than she wanted to admit, moments when the old doubt returned stronger than before, whispering that maybe she had reached her limit, that maybe this was where her progress would stop. And for a brief time those thoughts felt real, because the gap she once closed seemed to open again in a new form. But this time Emma did not panic. She did not compare herself endlessly. She returned to the only method she truly trusted, one step at a time, one night at a time. She went back to her routine, sitting at a desk in a shared dorm room, under a simple lamp, just like before, reading, writing, trying, failing, trying again. And once again it did not look impressive from the outside. No one applauded her for staying up late. No one noticed the extra hours she put in. But that was never the point, because she had learned that real growth does not need an audience. It only needs consistency. And slowly the same pattern began to form. The confusion became clarity. The difficulty became familiarity. And the fear began to fade. Not because the challenges disappeared, but because she had changed the way she faced them. And one evening, as she sat reviewing her work after a long day, she realized something quietly. Powerful, she was no longer trying to prove that she belonged. She was simply doing the work required to stay, and that shift changed everything. Because now her focus was not on others, it was on her own progress, her own effort, her own path. And as the weeks passed, the same discipline that once built her foundation began to elevate her again, not in a dramatic way, but in a steady, undeniable direction. And once more, without anyone truly noticing how it started, Emma was rising not because she was different from others, but because she was willing to continue when it was difficult, and deep down she understood that this quiet pattern, this repeated choice to not quit, was leading her towards something far greater than she could currently see. As time moved forward, Emma no longer counted her progress in days or weeks. She measured it in moments when she chose to continue instead of stopping. And those moments became more frequent, more natural, until discipline was no longer something she forced. It became part of who she was. And with that quiet transformation came results that others could finally see. Her grades improved steadily. Her professors began to recognize her consistency, not because she spoke the loudest or stood out in obvious ways, but because her work spoke with a clarity that could not be ignored. And slowly her name began to appear in places she once thought were reserved for others: academic lists, research opportunities, small recognitions that marked a shift from effort to impact. But even as these signs of progress appeared, Emma remained grounded in the same routine that built her foundation, because she understood something that many people overlook. Success is not a single moment. It is a pattern that must be repeated, and the moment you stop, the pattern breaks. And so she continued, through long nights and early mornings, through challenges that demanded more than she felt ready to give. And then one day an opportunity arrived that felt different from the others. It was not just another assignment or exam. It was a chance to present her work on a larger stage, in front of people who had spent years mastering their fields, people whose knowledge and experience far exceeded her own. And when she first saw the invitation, her immediate reaction was hesitation, not because she did not want it, but because it felt too big, too important, too far beyond what she once believed was possible for someone like her. And for a moment the old voice returned, questioning whether she was ready, whether she truly belonged in that space. But this time the answer did not come from confidence. It came from memory. She remembered the nights she studied when no one believed in her, the moments she continued when it would have been easier to quit, and she realized that readiness was not something she needed to wait for. It was something she had been building all along, step by step, without even realizing it. And so she accepted the opportunity, not because she felt fearless, but because she had learned how to move forward despite fear. And the days leading up to that moment were filled with preparation, refining her ideas, practicing her delivery, revisiting the same details again and again until they became clear and steady. And once again she returned to the same quiet process that had carried her through every stage of her journey: consistent effort, patient improvement, and the willingness to stay when things felt uncertain. And as the day approached, there was no dramatic change in who she was. She was still the same person who once sat under a dim light in a small apartment, still someone who chose discipline over comfort. But now that same pattern was about to be seen by the world in a way she had never experienced before. And without realizing it fully, Emma was standing at the edge of a moment that would define not just how others saw her, but how far her silent work had truly taken her. The room was larger than any place Emma had ever stood in before, filled with quiet anticipation and focused attention. And as she stepped forward, there was no applause yet, no recognition, only a moment suspended between preparation and reality. And in that moment, she felt everything at once: the distance from where she started, the weight of everything she had built, and the quiet understanding that this was not luck. This was the result of every decision she made when no one was watching. And as she began to speak, her voice was not perfect, but it was steady, carrying the clarity of someone who had spent countless hours learning, refining, and growing without needing validation. And as she continued, something shifted in the room, not dramatically, but gradually. People leaned in, not because she was louder than others, but because her work was real, her ideas were grounded, and her presence carried a quiet confidence that could not be faked. And by the time she finished, there was a pause, a brief silence that felt deeper than noise, followed by recognition that did not need exaggeration, because it was genuine. And in that moment, Emma did not feel like someone who had finally arrived. She felt like someone who had simply continued long enough to be seen. And as the event ended and people approached her with questions, respect, and interest, she responded the same way she always had, calm, thoughtful, grounded, because nothing about her process had changed. And later that night, as she sat alone again, this time not in a small apartment, but in a quiet space that reflected how far she had come, she allowed herself to think back, not to the moment on stage, but to the nights no one saw, the nights that truly defined her path. And she realized something that many people never understand. Success is not the moment when others recognize you. It is the long series of moments when you choose not to give up on yourself, and everything the world sees is only the result of what was built in silence. And even now, with everything she had achieved, Emma knew the journey was not over, because the same rules still applied, the same quiet discipline, the same commitment to continue when it was difficult. And as she looked ahead, there was no need for certainty, no need for guarantees, because she had already learned the one thing that mattered most. If you keep showing up, if you keep doing the work when it is hard, when it is quiet, when no one is watching, then one day the world will see what you have built, but by then, you will already know who you have become.